foundation for Kamal. Discovering that true spiritual excellence doesn't require us to ignore our human hearts, but to embrace them fully. Through the stories of Karbala and the example of our beloved Prophet, we're learning that our tears, struggles, and authentic emotions aren't obstacles to divine love. They're the very pathways through which God's light shines. Join us for 10 nights of healing from the false choice between being spiritual or being human, and discovering what it means to live as complete human beings in service of divine purpose. This Muharram, we're exploring a return to our divine humanity as a foundation for Kamal. Discovering that true spiritual excellence doesn't require us to ignore our human hearts, but to embrace them fully. Through the stories of Karbala and the example of our beloved Prophet, we're learning that our tears, struggles, and authentic emotions aren't obstacles to divine love. They're the very pathways through which God's light shines. Join us for 10 nights of healing from the false choice between being spiritual or being human, and discovering what it means to live as complete human beings in service of divine purpose. This Muharram, we're exploring a return to our divine humanity as a foundation for Kamal. Discovering that true spiritual excellence doesn't require us to ignore our human hearts, but to embrace them fully. Through the stories of Karbala and the example of our beloved Prophet, we're learning that our tears, struggles, and authentic emotions aren't obstacles to divine love. They're the very pathways through which God's light shines. Join us for 10 nights of healing from the false choice between being spiritual or being human, and discovering what it means to live as complete human beings in service of divine purpose. This Muharram, we're exploring a return to our divine humanity as a foundation for Kamal. Discovering that true spiritual excellence doesn't require us to ignore our human hearts, but to embrace them fully. Through the stories of Karbala and the example of our beloved Prophet, we're learning that our tears, struggles, and authentic emotions aren't obstacles to divine love. They're the very pathways through which God's light shines. Join us for 10 nights of healing from the false choice between being spiritual or being human, and discovering what it means to live as complete human beings in service of divine purpose. This Muharram, we're exploring a return to our divine humanity as a foundation for Kamal. Discovering that true spiritual excellence doesn't require us to ignore our human hearts, but to embrace them fully. Through the stories of Karbala and the example of our beloved Prophet, we're learning that our tears, struggles, and authentic emotions aren't obstacles to divine love. They're the very pathways through which God's light shines. Join us for 10 nights of healing from the false choice between being spiritual or being human, and discovering what it means to live as complete human beings in service of divine purpose. This Muharram, we're exploring a return to our divine humanity as a foundation for Kamal. Discovering that true spiritual excellence doesn't require us to ignore our human hearts, but to embrace them fully. Through the stories of Karbala and the example of our beloved Prophet, we're learning that our tears, struggles, and authentic emotions aren't obstacles to divine love. They're the very pathways through which God's light shines. Join us for 10 nights of healing from the false choice between being spiritual or being human, and discovering what it means to live as complete human beings in service of divine purpose. This Muharram, we're exploring a return to our divine humanity as a foundation for Kamal, discovering that true spiritual excellence doesn't require us to ignore our human hearts, but to embrace them fully. Through the stories of Karbala and the example of our beloved Prophet, we're learning that our tears, struggles, and authentic emotions aren't obstacles to divine love. They're the very pathways through which God's light shines. Join us for 10 nights of healing from the false choice between being spiritual or being human, and discovering what it means to live as complete human beings in service of divine purpose. This Muharram, we're exploring a return to our divine humanity as a foundation for Kamal, discovering that true spiritual excellence doesn't require us to ignore our human hearts, but to embrace them fully. Through the stories of Karbala and the example of our beloved Prophet, we're learning that our tears, struggles, and authentic emotions aren't obstacles to divine love. They're the very pathways through which God's light shines. Join us for 10 nights of healing from the false choice between being spiritual or being human, and discovering what it means to live as complete human beings in service of divine purpose. This Muharram, we're exploring a return to our divine humanity as a foundation for Kamal, discovering that true spiritual excellence doesn't require us to ignore our human hearts, but to embrace them fully. Through the stories of Karbala and the example of our beloved Prophet, we're learning that our tears, struggles, and authentic emotions aren't obstacles to divine love. They're the very pathways through which God's light shines. Join us for 10 nights of healing from the false choice between being spiritual or being human, and discovering what it means to live as complete human beings in service of divine purpose. This Muharram, we're exploring a return to our divine humanity as a foundation for Kamal, discovering that true spiritual excellence doesn't require us to ignore our human hearts, but to embrace them fully. Through the stories of Karbala and the example of our beloved Prophet, we're learning that our tears, struggles, and authentic emotions aren't obstacles to divine love. They're the very pathways through which God's light shines. Join us for 10 nights of healing from the false choice between being spiritual or being human, and discovering what it means to live as complete human beings in service of divine purpose. This Muharram, we're exploring a return to our divine humanity as a foundation for Kamal, discovering that true spiritual excellence doesn't require us to ignore our human hearts, but to embrace them fully. Through the stories of Karbala and the example of our beloved Prophet, we're learning that our tears, struggles, and authentic emotions aren't obstacles to divine love. They're the very pathways through which God's light shines. Join us for 10 nights of healing from the false choice between being spiritual or being human, and discovering what it means to live as complete human beings in service of divine purpose. This Muharram, we're exploring a return to our divine humanity as a foundation for Kamal, discovering that true spiritual excellence doesn't require us to ignore our human hearts, but to embrace them fully. Through the stories of Karbala and the example of our beloved Prophet, we're learning that our tears, struggles, and authentic emotions aren't obstacles to divine love. They're the very pathways through which God's light shines. Join us for 10 nights of healing from the false choice between being spiritual or being human, and discovering what it means to live as complete human beings in service of divine purpose. This Muharram, we're exploring a return to our divine humanity as a foundation for Kamal, discovering that true spiritual excellence doesn't require us to ignore our human hearts, but to embrace them fully. Through the stories of Karbala and the example of our beloved Prophet, we're learning that our tears, struggles, and authentic emotions aren't obstacles to divine love. They're the very pathways through which God's light shines. Join us for 10 nights of healing from the false choice between being spiritual or being human, and discovering what it means to live as complete human beings in service of divine purpose. This Muharram, we're exploring a return to our divine humanity as a foundation for Kamal, discovering that true spiritual excellence doesn't require us to ignore our human hearts, but to embrace them fully. Through the stories of Karbala and the example of our beloved Prophet, we're learning that our tears, struggles, and authentic emotions aren't obstacles to divine love. They're the very pathways through which God's light shines. Join us for 10 nights of healing from the false choice between being spiritual or being human, and discovering what it means to live as complete human beings in service of divine purpose. This Muharram, we're exploring a return to our divine humanity as a foundation for Kamal, discovering that true spiritual excellence doesn't require us to ignore our human hearts, but to embrace them fully. Through the stories of Karbala and the example of our beloved Prophet, we're learning that our tears, struggles, and authentic emotions aren't obstacles to divine love. They're the very pathways through which God's light shines. Join us for 10 nights of healing from the false choice between being spiritual or being human, and discovering what it means to live as complete human beings in service of divine purpose. This Muharram, we're exploring a return to our divine humanity as a foundation for Kamal, discovering that true spiritual excellence doesn't require us to ignore our human hearts, but to embrace them fully. Through the stories of Karbala and the example of our beloved Prophet, we're learning that our tears, struggles, and authentic emotions aren't obstacles to divine love. They're the very pathways through which God's light shines. Join us for 10 nights of healing from the false choice between being spiritual or being human, and discovering what it means to live as complete human beings in service of divine purpose. This Muharram, we're exploring a return to our divine humanity as a foundation for Kamal, discovering that true spiritual excellence doesn't require us to ignore our human hearts, but to embrace them fully. Through the stories of Karbala and the example of our beloved Prophet, we're learning that our tears, struggles, and authentic emotions aren't obstacles to divine love. They're the very pathways through which God's light shines. Join us for 10 nights of healing from the false choice between being spiritual or being human, and discovering what it means to live as complete human beings in service of divine purpose. This Muharram, we're exploring a return to our divine humanity as a foundation for Kamal, discovering that true spiritual excellence doesn't require us to ignore our human hearts, but to embrace them fully. Through the stories of Karbala and the example of our beloved Prophet, we're learning that our tears, struggles, and authentic emotions aren't obstacles to divine love. They're the very pathways through which God's light shines. Join us for 10 nights of healing from the false choice between being spiritual or being human, and discovering what it means to live as complete human beings in service of divine purpose. This Muharram, we're exploring a return to our divine humanity as a foundation for Kamal, discovering that true spiritual excellence doesn't require us to ignore our human hearts, but to embrace them fully. Through the stories of Karbala and the example of our beloved Prophet, we're learning that our tears, struggles, and authentic emotions aren't obstacles to divine love. They're the very pathways through which God's light shines. Join us for 10 nights of healing from the false choice between being spiritual or being human, and discovering what it means to live as complete human beings in service of divine.
Heard can be the rustling of the waves of the river. Rages on the burning fire within his wounded liver. But despite this intense pain, he sees in front of him pleasure. For the memories of his life are, until now, his greatest treasures. The love and affection of Muhammad upon him like a fortress, a shelter, always there to cool him from the cruelty of the sun and from the swelter. Thirst was never an issue, for upon his blessed tongue he'd suckle, though in this heat, thirst constricted his neck like a tightening buckle. And what is more comforting than the love and tenderness of a mother, when that mother is Fatima, whose status is greater than every other? Protection and wardship, tell me who is better than the Lion of God? Ali's shadow was enough to expose any threat and reveal them as fraud. But now, on this day, along with Hassan, to an audience they are reduced, watching the hounds of hellfire, whom by the devil himself are seduced. He is alone, and deserted with him on earth, there's simply no one left. His body bears the wounds of the battle of friends and family, leaving him bereft. When Muslim, Habib, Zuhair, Burair, Hur, and the rest, when they all did fall, 'twas he who split the cavalries with no regard for himself, to be with them, to help them cross that temporal wall. With each companion and with each charge, he sustained a blow, but instead of slowing, made apparent to all was his divine glow. Then came the turn of his family to defend him and his honor. This was Zainab's horror, and truly a heavy test upon her. First was Ali Akbar, the legendary image of a Muhammad al-Amin, his young life robbed in front of his father, a scene so truly obscene. The children of Abu Talib then, one by one to the field of the battle. They too, despite their bravery and courage, corralled and mowed down like cattle. Even his infant son is not spared. To the slaughter he is sent. It is in these moments that Hussein's back is more noticeably bent. But it's the fall of his brother, the moon, that causes the most pain. For here, his back is broken when Abbas is finally slain. Injuries have mounted and indignities have been suffered, For these enemies, the line of good and evil have long been obscured. Tell me, O people, who sits and tears his shirt and trousers before a fight? The one who wishes that they not be stolen after. Allah, what a horrible sight. In addition to all the injuries of the day, upon his head a sword collapses, cutting through his headgear, soaking it in blood, but not for a moment are there any lapses. For in that moment, these serpents slither towards his camp. Hussein calls out to cease and desist and does his attack ramp. Enemies and foes are amazed by the determination and his fight as he is attacked from the front and the back, from the left and the right. In this state, he warns them about the detestability of shedding his blood, for doing so would bring upon them divine wrath and in great flood. Cuts from swords, welts from rocks, holes from spears upon his body replete. These heathens spared no part of his body, from head to his feet. Overcome by his wounds and the constant barrage of arrows and stones, he finally falls, his body like a porcupine suspended. One can hear the celestial moans. Wounds endured from each death, both physical and internal. Hussein lay upon the ground, staring at his fate now eternal. Perhaps he looked left and he looked right to see all those who with him fell. The time had come now to bid this mortal realm a final farewell. Footsteps can be heard as the devils proceed to finish their job. Over him they gather like a bloodthirsty and depraved mob. Zainab cries out that will they be the ones to kill the grandson of their prophet, and upon him commit treachery and humiliate him as they saw fit? Hussein that day endured everything, but this simply was far too much to bear. He could not allow his sister to suffer such humiliation and despair. In one final act of guidance to her, he signaled that she should flee, for none of his family should witness the Satan's final moment of glee. Allah, Allah, how is it the river flowed and the sun continued to shine? Allah, Allah, was it that you wished to show the world Hussein's love for the divine? In those last moments, hesitation prevailed, as all were simply too cowardly. It could only be the worst of creation that carried out an act so utterly dastardly. When the sword fell upon that neck which bore the kisses of Muhammad and Fatima, the heavens shuddered, the skies turned red, the earth shook at the hands of this utter and complete anathema. And so Hussein's head upon a lance raised, facing the river that flowed. Peace be upon you, O Abdullah, creation saluted this all-encompassing ode. Bar Muhammadin Mali Muhammad Salawat.
Jazakallah Shabir Bhai. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Once again, it's my pleasure to host this event here for our 5th night of Muharram. It's hard to believe we're already halfway through. On behalf of the Oil Board, we really thank you for your attendance. It's honestly our privilege to bring you this programming this year. While we are privileged to gather here in Toronto, one of the most diverse cities in the world, we do acknowledge that we are on unceded Indigenous land, traditionally stewarded by the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. As we embark on this time of Muharram, a time of remembrance and spiritual learning, let us also remember our collective responsibility towards reconciliation and stand in solidarity with all our First Nation communities. I'd like to start just by reciting Dua Shifa for Brother Mirza Alam, Dr. Abdulaziz Sachedina, and Sister Zarina Hirani. They're all friends of oil and do need our prayers, and really for anyone that needs our prayers. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Amma yujibu mustara iza da'a wa yakshifa su. Amma yujibu mustara iza da'a yakshifa su. I'm now going to ask Sister Zubina, also a board member, to please come up and say a few words.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I was away for a couple of days, so you know what happens in your absence. You kind of get given assignments, and one of my assignments today is to not only welcome the board or welcome our members, but introduce you to our board members and remind you a little bit of some of the housekeeping items for the next couple of days. Of course, we are very honored to have Brother Jabir Rustam as our president. We have Brother Murtaza Mamataki as our treasurer. I oversee health, wellness, and as you will probably come to learn, some of the tabarruk and meal issues. We have Sister Anar Ibrahim, who oversees youth affairs and has done a great job this year with our youth presentations. Each night is dedicated to one of the women of Islam, and so I hope you get a chance to enjoy those youth presentations. Also, Brother Akil Jawani, who's helping with sound and AV affairs. Brother Abdulaziz Devji, religious affairs, and new this year, Sister Ciara Rustam, who's been doing an amazing job as a project coordinator for us, for our oil board, helping with all of the marketing and the emails and all of the Instagram posts that you're seeing. So I hope that's helpful to you and informative. Couple points today in terms of membership. Knowing our membership numbers is an incredibly important and powerful tool. So please, please, please renew your membership. We need to know who our membership is, where they're coming from. To be able to meet your needs, we need to know who you are. So please do take a moment out at the desk and register for this year. Renew your membership, become a member. All that information is really useful to us. None of all of that you see today would really be possible without your support. So in addition to renewing your membership, please remember to consider donation. I think we are halfway in terms of our donation drive for this Muharram, so please keep us in your thoughts as you think about how you want to donate and support us. Another point is that of registrations. We have instituted the registration process through Ticket Tailor so that we know and can anticipate how many people are going to attend. So, for example, for those of you who attended the seminar on Saturday, we had 61 registrants and 31 people showed up. We had arranged lunch for all of those people. So understanding how important it is for you to follow through if you're registering, or let us know if you're not able to attend a couple days ahead of time, really allows us to be responsible with funds and for there not to be asraf. The other housekeeping items I think I was asked to just remind people of is in the back of the room. The other day, a lot of coffee and teacups were found, and half-filled teacups and spilled tea and things like that. Just try to be a little mindful of that. We have a lot of people that are helping in terms of volunteers, but we want to make their lives easier. Fireside chat. And so we're going to be using this hall to do that. So we're going to ask parents who are not 13 to 25 to be going out into that hallway. And we certainly don't expect you to stand the whole time. We're also going to try to use the back of the room if we can close off these. Is that correct? We can do that? Okay. So we're going to close off these dividers here so that people can actually sit. You don't have to stand the whole time while that fireside chat is going on. I think that's all we have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Zabina. Just a couple of other things I just want to cover off. Please do join the WhatsApp group. It's an amazing way to keep in touch with us, rather than emails. I do see a few people are inviting themselves to the WhatsApp group, which is great, but we'd like to have more. It's just much easier for us to push out content to you guys, versus the old traditional email. So you'll see the QR code pop up on the screen at some point. Please do join. There you go. Secondly, our Ashura Day program is next Sunday. Program begins at 10 a.m. and will conclude with Salat and lunch as well. Amal will be recited by Brother Hussein Darcy. Just in terms of registrations, we have about 100 so far, so we do expect a good amount still to be registering. And once again, please, if you have registered, please show up, and if not, just advise us a few days in advance so we can plan accordingly. Tonight's Tabarruk, here we go. Tonight's Tabarruk is sponsored by Raza Naqvi. Please, let's all recite Surah Fatiha for all the marhumin. Now I'd like to call Sister Serena and Brother Mikhail Naqvi. They're going to do a youth presentation on Kulthum.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. By time indeed mankind is in loss, except for those who have believed and done righteous deeds and advised each other to truth and advised each other to patience. Salawat.
Before I begin, I'd like to reflect briefly on the recitation we just heard from Serena on Surah Al-Asr. This short surah, though just 3 verses, captures the entire philosophy of Karbala. It describes not only Imam Hussein's sacrifice, but also the steadfastness of those who survived to carry his message. And among them was Kulthum, a woman whose life exemplified belief, righteous action, truth, and sabr in its most painful form. When we speak of the tragedy of Karbala, our minds instinctively turn to the bravery of Imam Hussein, the cruelty of Yazid, and the unforgettable role of Bibi Zainab in preserving the moral legacy of that day. But in that same caravan, standing in the same dust, watching the same horrors unfold, was another voice, one less often remembered, yet no less vital, Kulthum. The daughter of Imam Ali and Bibi Fatima, Kulthum was raised in the very heart of Islam. Her grandfather was the Prophet himself. She grew up alongside Imam Hassan and Hussein with divine revelation echoing through the walls of her home. Her identity was shaped not just by lineage, but by values of justice, sacrifice, and unwavering devotion to the truth. At Karbala, Kulthum did not carry a sword, but she carried a burden arguably heavier. She witnessed the systematic slaughter of her family, her brothers, her nephews, her kin. She endured the aftermath, the burning tents, the cries of the children, and the cruel parading of the Prophet's household through the streets of Kufa and Damascus. And yet, despite such unbearable grief, she, like her sister Zainab, spoke. In Kufa, she delivered a powerful sermon condemning the people who had betrayed her family. She questioned their conscience, exposed their hypocrisy, and reminded them of the moral failure they had just committed. Her words were not impulsive. They were deliberate, eloquent, and piercing. They forced even hardened hearts to weep. In Islamic tradition, Kulthum is remembered not only as a witness of Karbala, but as a mujahida in her own right, a struggler in the path of God, not through the battlefield, but through truth-telling and resistance. Her speeches, though less recorded than Zainab's, carry the same spirit, the spirit of a woman who refused to let the massacre of her family be distorted or forgotten. In a patriarchal society that routinely silenced women, she stood unshaken before crowds, governors, and tyrants, upholding the legacy of her grandfather and the mission of her brother. In many ways, Kulthum represents the unsung heroes of Karbala, those whose stories remain in the shadows, but without whom the message of Ashura could not have survived. Her strength was not in commanding armies, but in persevering meaning. She ensured that the blood spilled on that desert would not be washed away by time or propaganda. Her legacy asks us a simple, profound question. When the world turns its back on truth, will you stand and speak even if your voice trembles? May we carry the spirit of Kulthum in our own lives, with courage, dignity, and a commitment to justice, no matter the cost. Salawat.
Jazakallah, Serena and Mikhail. Thank you so much. I'd like to introduce our distinguished speaker, Sheikh Mohamed Yasin Devji, who was raised in Toronto, migrated to the holy city of Qom in 2006 to pursue Islamic studies in the Hawza. In 2010, he took a 2-year leave to study the Arabic language in the Sayyida Zainab district of Damascus. In 2012, he returned to Qom to continue his seminary studies, where he obtained a BA in Islamic philosophy and mysticism. He continued studying Islamic philosophy, mysticism, jurisprudence, and principles of jurisprudence to the advanced level. Please let's have a loud salawat to welcome Sheikh to the stage.
Can you hear me at the back? Let's do our sound check. Probably the two mics are clashing. Sure? Okay. All right. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على جميع الأنبياء والمرسلين لا سيما خاتمهم وأفضلهم محمد مصطفى صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. وعلى أهل بيت الطهارة لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين الحجة ابن الحسن أجر الله تعالى فرجه الشريف.
السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي هلت بفنائك عليك منا جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعل الله آخر عهد مني لزيارتكم السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. Please recite a salawat. أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وقوله الحق لقد خلقنا الإنسان في أحسن التقويم ثم رددناه أسفل السافلين آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. My elders, dearest brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In keeping with our pattern, keeping with our theme, tonight, please recite a salawat. Sorry about that. So in keeping with our pattern and keeping with our theme, tonight's lecture I would like to dedicate to another very, very special group of people. As we said, I will be taking the time to honor people who have inspired me in my past and in my present. And the group of people I would like to honor today are teachers. Teachers are such an important part of our lives, especially in growing up. They influence us, they shape us, they bring us up. And like people in the mental health profession, it is a labor of love. And as a result, you feel the love with them. So exalted is the station of a teacher in Islam that we have a narration attributed to Amir al-Mu'mineen where he says, Man allamani harfan faqad sayyarani abdan. The one who has taught me a word has made me his servant. In the UK where I live, there are a very, very special group of teachers that I have a chance to work with. At the madrasa in London, there is a grade which they have instituted in the madrasa there, which is after madrasa studies are officially over. It would be the equivalent, I think it would be the equivalent of grade 10 over here. Madrasa finished theirs at grade 9. This particular grade is known as the Higher Education Department, and it is run by a number of individuals. And the purpose of this grade, and this is why I like it so much, is that it doesn't teach a set curriculum like they do at the madrasas in the previous grades. This particular curriculum is specifically developed for that age group to basically help them with life from Monday to Saturday. So we cover a plethora of issues, you name it. Anything that we can come up with in consultation with the children and in consultation with the parents that affects them from Monday to Saturday is what we cover with them. The dedicated individuals that run this department, and I've had the absolute pleasure of working with them, is headed up by the principal of the Shia Athnashri Madrasa in the UK, Brother Maysam Jaffer, who is one of the most decent and most wonderful human beings I've had the opportunity to meet. And the HED team is led by Sister Shaheen Mirali, Sister Safiya Tharu, Sister Taskeen Jaffer, Brother Abbas Mirali, Brother Abdul Rauf Shakoya, Sheikh Zuhair Ismail, and I also have the benefit and the great honor and privilege to be a part of that team. So tonight I would like to salute teachers from all walks of life, secular studies, Islamic studies, even mentors in our community. My respect and my love for you is great. May Allah bless each and every one of you, and may Allah show you the fruits or the flowers that bloom and you so painstakingly partake to nurture these things. Please recite a salawat. In our journey from the first night until now, what is the fifth night, we started off by introducing the concept of the fitra, that wonderful blessing that Allah breathed into all of us, that divine relationship that we share with Allah, that connection we have with Him that doesn't allow us to forget our true selves, because our true selves is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our origin is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it acts as a beautiful container, and within that container contains these 7 virtues that Allah explicitly identifies in the Quran, where He talks about, I love these people. In Arabic, the phrase used is Allah yuhibbu. So Allah yuhibbul muttaqeen, Allah yuhibbul mutawakkilin. Allah loves those people of taqwa. Allah loves those people of sabr, and so on and so forth. We talked about how when these 7 qualities and an awakened fitra come together to culminate in the insan al-kamil, the complete and the whole human being. And then we started one by one. We went through taqwa to talk about the first awakening, the first conscious awakening of insan in their awareness and their consciousness of God. Then we moved on to sabr, the divine patience and perseverance. In the third night, we covered, tawakkul, yes. We covered tawakkul, that trust and reliance in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah, so we've gotten to tawakkul. Tonight we move to Qist, right? Now, in understanding Qist, so one of my dear sisters yesterday pointed something out to me, which I'm glad she pointed out to me, because if she didn't, I would have continued doing it. People like me, because we've been working with these Arabic terms for so long, we literally take for granted that you all know what it means. So that's my bad. So I will try my best, and feel free if at any point in time, if you feel I'm using terminology that you don't understand, just feel free to put your hand up and say, I don't understand. No problem at all. So Qist is defined as justice. But is there another term that we've heard growing up that's defined as justice? Can anybody tell me? Adl, right? Adl, adala. So now the question is, okay, what's the difference between the two of them? The two do in fact mean justice, but they are implementations and manifestations of justice in very different ways. So let's define adl first, right? Adl comes from the root meaning balance, equity, straightness, and represents the foundational principle of virtue, the virtue of justice itself, right? Qist, from its root, is meaning fair distribution. Proper measure represents the practical manifestation of justice. So, in other words, adl is a state and is the state of justice, and qist is the practical application of that justice. Okay? So, for example, we'll demonstrate by way of example, both adl and qist. A judge's character being fair and unbiased, his character being fair and unbiased is adl. That judge is adil. Okay? The verdict that judge delivers after reviewing evidence and applying the law with fairness is qist. They're not separate from one another, but they work one another. You can't have qist without adl. That's clear. Now, you must be wondering, all this talk of justice, right? What are we going to be talking about? Are we going to be talking about the injustice in the world? Are we going to be talking about everything that's going on in the world? Based on the pattern that we've been following, what do you think the answer to that is? No, we're not. Not directly. What we are going to do is to take the concepts, because the concept of adl and qist feed into each other. Adl lays the foundation for us to behave with qist, to become of the muqsit, to become of the muqsitin. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to take qist and we're going to turn it inwards and look at ourselves. And why are we going to look at ourselves and why this internal work matters? You see, when we look around us today, there is a world that we live in. There is a universe that we live in. But I bring your attention to a narration attributed to Amir al-Mu'mineen in Nahjul Balagha. What does he say? He says, you think you are a small entity, but within you is a universe. Within you is a universe. The external world that we see is also a reflection of the world that exists inside of us. There is a whole world that exists inside of us, right? Now you must be wondering, how is it that we can apply adl and qist to our internal being? Please recite a salawat. Question. Qist, we know as a practical manifestation of adl is an action. Right? I want you to think about this. If we take qist and apply it internally, what do you think that internal action is? Even putting qist aside, an internal action, what do you envision an internal action to be? Go ahead.
If you want justice for yourself, you should have the same justice for others.
Okay. Justice for yourself, justice for the outside. Okay. Anybody else? Reflection. Okay. Compassion. Okay. We'll come back to this. These are all very good points, right? The Quranic foundation of qist is to be found in Surah number 4, verse 135. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, kunu qawwamina bil qist, shuhada'a lillahi walau ala anfusikum. O you who have faith, be maintainers of justice, witnesses for Allah, even if it be against yourself. Bear witness against yourself. There's something very beautiful in this verse. Allah says, even if it is against yourself. So this isn't about external activism first. This is about internal activism, right? This is about developing the adl to witness the truth when it challenges everything we've believed about ourselves. And then having the qist to act upon that truth. Both dynamics working together in harmony. So, let us look at the application of adl as an internal intervention. Internal adl is like developing spiritual eyes. Spiritual eyes that can see our inner landscapes very clearly. Recognizing when our fears are sitting in the seat that belongs to our values. When our past is making decisions that belong to our present. When our ego is wearing the crown that belongs to our authentic self. This isn't about judgment. This is about loving recognition of divine order. I will come to an example. This is theoretical right now, and we'll get to an example. What does qist look like internally? Qist is the gentle courage to actually rearrange our inner world according to what our adl identifies in us, what our adala identifies in us, right? It is like a loving parent to our own soul, tenderly but firmly helping each part of us find a rightful, healthy place within the family of our existence. In other words, when we take adl and look at ourselves, adl is a type of awareness, is a type of self-awareness, looking deep within ourselves to see what is taking place in the world of ourselves. And when we see what is going on with us, that adl comes up and says, okay, this, what's going on with you, this fear you have, it's not in its place. This ego you have, or this past that's influencing your present, that's not in its place. Because remember, whether it's qist or whether it's adl, the Islamic concept of justice, very simply put, whether it's adl, whether it's qist, is to put things in their rightful place. That is the ultimate definition of justice from the Islamic perspective. So what adl does is, adl looks inside of you and identifies what is out of place. This is out of place, that is out of place, this is not in its place. And it brings about that awareness to identify that this is out of place. Qist comes along after adl and takes those things and begins to either remove them or place them in its rightful place within you. It's all very abstract, so let's move to a practical example. The practical example is choosing authenticity over people-pleasing. You've heard of the term people-pleasing. I hope you've heard of the term people-pleasing. If not, I'll give you a definition, because I prepared it. People-pleasing is when someone puts others' needs, wants, and approval above their own, often at the cost of their own well-being, in order to avoid conflict or gain acceptance. I'll read that again, because people-pleasing, in my lived experience, is very common in our culture. People-pleasing is when someone puts others' needs, wants, or approval above their own, often at the cost of their own well-being, in order to avoid conflict or gain acceptance. Before we move to the example of people-pleasing, right? People-pleasing could be, find yourself in a situation where you are in a relationship, and in that relationship, the other party is bullying you, is bullying you, is bullying you. You suppress your own desire to express that this is painful for me in order to avoid conflict, because you're afraid of conflict. You don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to change up the status quo, right? The reason why I bring up the example of people-pleasing is, and again, going back to the first night promise I made you. I said to you that in the space that we are over here, I would bring all parts of myself, including my vulnerable parts, right? Because my way of being and my values dictate to me that in order to be authentic with you, I have to show vulnerability, because I've asked you to be vulnerable in the space with me, right? Now I realize, I am very cognizant that perhaps my vulnerability might make some of you uncomfortable. But I'm also going to tell you there's also no apology forthcoming for that, because I also believe that this vulnerability, this ability for us to connect relationally in our communities is something that has been lacking. Because, and again, I will only give my example. I'm not going to project onto anybody. But my own example growing up in this community, there were at various junctures where I found my community unsafe to be able to express my own vulnerability. Because I saw that if I express my vulnerability, I get made fun of, it'd be weaponized against me, I get stigmatized, all these things. When we talk about difficult conversations, our community needs to have difficult conversations. We need to have these difficult conversations because we need to foster an environment of mercy, care, compassion, and most of all, safety. To be able to be safe is a very important need of a human being. Just as important as it is to feel a sense of belonging. But what ends up happening, again, this is my lived experience. I don't know what it's like for you, and I won't pretend to know what it's like for you. I can guess what it's like for you, but I won't. But there becomes a conflict. That inherent need for me as a human being, the social creature as I've been created, the inherent need to feel belonging to something is then in conflict with the fact that I don't have a safe place to feel that sense of belonging. What do you think ends up happening? What do you think ends up happening? This is not a criticism on anybody. This is not an attack on anybody. But often I hear from my elders. I hear from my elders a lot. The youth are not coming, the youth are not coming, the youth are not coming, the youth are not coming. Well, this is one of the reasons why the youth are not coming. Because today, our youth know better. Their system of education, mental health is incorporated in their system of education. They're much more aware of these things, right? And they're not going to, and I'm not speaking as a youth, I'm 50 years old, yeah? I feel like a youth many times. When I wake up in the morning and my knees sound like a box of Rice Krispies rather, I know I'm not a youth anymore, okay? But growing up here and going through what I went through in this community and also watching as well too, these are some of the core issues that we have to look at. We have to create safe space. And by creating safe space, we have to nurture an environment that allows us to be vulnerable with each other, that allows us to have difficult conversations, that allows compassion, empathy to flourish. Please recite a salawat. So speaking of vulnerability, we take the example of people pleasing. Now, I myself, growing up, suffered from people pleasing. I still struggle with it till this day as a part of my life. I wasn't able to identify it in my personal therapy, but somewhere along the line, I felt a lack of validation in my life. And as a result of feeling that lack of validation within myself, I then began to seek that validation outside. And so one of the things I resorted to was people pleasing. I became a people pleaser. If you wanted something done, I'd do it. Even if I break my back doing it, I would do it. If you wanted to treat me like garbage, and I'm your friend, you can treat me like garbage because I still want you to be my friend. That was me, right? Now, if we look at people pleasing and we apply the internal adl and the internal qist, over time you'll gradually see your internal landscape more clearly. You recognize that your constant yes to others comes from fear of rejection. Fear of rejection, right? Not genuine love. You can see that your real thoughts and feelings have been buried under layers of accommodation. You perceive that the exhaustion you feel comes from a performing version of yourself instead of being authentic. You might begin to understand that your relationships would be healthier if built on truth rather than people pleasing. This is your internal adl telling you, this is not right. There is a problem. There is a problem. It is not aligning to what you need to be, right? Then, when the adala activates in you, there's a small gap period, right? It says, I can see all of this clearly now. Your adil is telling you that I can see all of this clearly now. I have clarity. My people pleasing is making me miserable and keeping my relationships very shallow. But I'm terrified of change. What if people reject the real me? What if people reject the real me? That's when Qist comes in. After your internal adala has activated this awareness inside of you, after your internal adala has told you what's happening is not right, has identified what's happening is not right, and the consequences of what is not right, this is where Qist comes in. Your heart at that point finally develops the intention. This is what I was getting at. The action of the soul is intention. You make that intention and that intentionality to align your adl with what you can see is clearly happening. You choose, or you intend to choose, to respond from your authentic self rather than fear. You deliberately orient your heart towards truth-telling instead of performance. Before you speak, you pause and ask, what does my authentic self want to say here? Rather than, what do they want to hear? This is the action of the soul. This is the action. This is the qist of the soul. The integration. When your internal adl and qist work together, you can both see authenticity is healthier and intend to practice it. Your external actions flow naturally from the internal alignment that you have, and you speak your truth kindly but clearly. You set boundaries from love rather than anger, and you show up with yourself without the internal war. Imagine your soul as a beautiful home that has been lived in for years without proper care. Furniture pushed into the corners where it doesn't belong, important things buried under a pile of lesser concerns, so on and so forth, right? Internal adl helps us to see that this home could look what it could look like even when everything is out of its rightful place. Adl will then take it and rearrange that entire beautiful home inside of you, right? Qist then gives you the courage to actually, adl conceptualizes what that beautiful house looks inside of you, what it looks like without the clutter. Qist then gives you the courage and the strength to overcome the fear, to start to move the furniture, dust the windows, give the walls a paint job, fix the roof, and so on and so forth. It is the foundation of all external justice. This isn't about becoming self-absorbed. It's about becoming authentic enough to serve others from a position of wholeness, from a position of awareness, from a position of clarity. When Allah asks us to be maintainers of justice, He's not asking us to fix everyone else while ignoring our own internal disorder. Please recite a salawat. He's whispering the most liberating invitation. Would you like to experience what it feels like when everything inside you is rightful and beautiful? Would you like to know the peace that comes when your values lead and your fears serve? Your authentic and when your fears have dispersed and your authentic self finally comes to the fore. What are the problems? What are some of the problems that we can look at that occur when our internal adl and our internal qist are not aligned, right? When our internal adl is underdeveloped, without that adl, we become spiritually myopic. We mistake our ego's voice for our soul's calling. We let wounded emotions make decisions that belong to healed wisdom. We can't distinguish between our authentic needs and our conditioned wants. We lose the ability to see parts of us, parts of our past, which parts of our past deserve honor and which parts need healing. So when we face difficulties from our past and we want to move on from those past experiences, by not exercising internal adl and qist, we get stuck in the past because we're not able to decipher this past experience, what am I supposed to do with it? And sometimes we get stuck. And the truth is sometimes we do get stuck. And that past then develops its own patterns. And we act on those patterns, which can be very harmful to us. When internal qist is blocked now, even when we glimpse divine order within ourselves, the divine order is that adl. Without qist, we can still remain trapped. How? We see that our authentic self deserves to lead, but we keep letting fear make the decision. So we've identified. Adl has done its job. It has identified for us what isn't good for us. What's inside of us, not good for us. But without the qist, without the practical manifestation of that justice, in place of it comes fear and prevents us from moving forward. We recognize that our past should inform, but not imprison, but we stay stuck in old patterns. Many people, all of us, I'm sure all of us have experienced this. We realize that we have past patterns and we know these past patterns are toxic. It's not that we don't know. We know they're toxic, but we get stuck. We get stuck inside of them. We know our values matter more than others' approval, but we keep performing for external validation. We understand what needs to change, but we lack the courage to actually rearrange our inner world. Some of the common patterns of that internal disorder that come to play, fear becomes the dictator in the kingdom of the internal world. It influences and dictates all the decisions that we make. Our anxieties about what others will think, about failing, about being alone, about making all our important decisions while our values sit silently in exile. The values are in the shed in the backyard, and fear is living in the house like a king. Past as a prison. Staying trapped in who we used to be because changing feels like death. To some, change is very difficult. I know for me it is. Very difficult. Staying trapped in who we used to be because changing feels like death, even when our soul is calling us towards growth and transformation. Our authentic self goes into hiding, burying our true thoughts, feelings, and dreams because we've learned they're not acceptable, while performing versions of ourselves that feel hollow and exhausting. External voices become our internal compass. External voices become our internal compass. letting others' approval determine our self-worth, while our own inner knowing withers from neglect and abandonment. In my people-pleasing paradigm, and in my growing up, I suffered from self-worth issues. I wouldn't have been in a people-pleasing paradigm had I not suffered from self-worth issues, right? Where did my self-worth come from? In my people-pleasing, I was looking for my self-worth and outside, be it my friends, be it the television, be it the society. It was exhausting. What freed me was one thing. What freed me was one thing that began the journey. And I say this to every one of you here who are struggling with your self-worth on a level. Your self-worth needs only be tied to one thing and one thing only. And that is, وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي. God says in the Quran, I breathed my spirit into you. وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي. I breathed my spirit into you. Therefore, you have the Spirit of God inside of you. You have God inside of you, your very being. You don't need to go outside looking for self-worth. When the Creator, the most majestic, Dhul Jalali wal Ikram, is inside of you. So learn to tie your self-worth to Allah. Because Allah would not have breathed His Spirit into you if He didn't think anything of you, if He didn't think the world of you. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for Allah. If Allah didn't love us, if Allah didn't validate us, if Allah didn't care for us, we would cease to exist. It's not even we would die. We would, in a moment, cease to exist. Always remember, وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي. That is the place our self-worth should be tied to and comes from. Please recite a salawat. What is the spiritual cost when this disorder takes over? Perhaps most tragically, our internal disorder separates us from Allah in the most intimate way, based on what I just said, because we are not actualizing Allah's Spirit inside of us. How can we witness Him clearly when fear clouds our spiritual vision? How can we hear His guidance when past conditioning drowns out His gentle whispers and His caring hand? How can we serve His creation authentically when we don't even know who we really are beneath all the masks that we have learned to wear? But there's hope. وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي. The truth is, and this truth should give peace to us with possibility. Allah created us with the capacity for both adl and internal qist. It exists in all of us. If we go back to our original lecture, adl and qist are already inside of us. We don't need to look somewhere. We don't need to go here. We don't need to go there. We don't need to read a book. It's already part of us. He's already blessed us with the ability to be just. To be just and to exercise that qist. It's for us to discover it inside ourselves. It's for us to let the noise to die down so we can hear adalat talking to us. We can hear qist talking to us. In every moment of disorder is actually our fitra challenging us to come home and arrange things. Please recite the salawat. So the time is short, and I don't think there'll be enough. Well, we will look at our case study, but very briefly. When we talk of qist and adl on the inside, for me, the personality that came up from Karbala was the personality of Zuhair ibn al-Qayn, right? I'll give you some history about Zuhair ibn al-Qayn. Zuhair ibn al-Qayn was a man who lived from perhaps even before the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen, before Amir al-Mu'mineen's caliphate. Of course he did. He was an Uthmani. And what I mean by that he was an Uthmani, he followed the line of succession and stopped at Uthman. He did not accept Amir al-Mu'mineen as the caliph after the death of Uthman. And the reason why he didn't is because he felt that Amir al-Mu'mineen was responsible for the first civil war in the history of Islam. Because as we know, after the caliphate of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the battle of Jamal took place. On one side, you had Amir al-Mu'mineen. On the other side, you had the mother of the believers, Aisha, Talha, and Zubair. So that's not a civil war, then I don't know what is. But the first civil war in Islam, and that hurt him. It really hurt him. It affected him because that's the reason he cites for not continuing on, right? The reason why I mention him is because in history, when we read, when Imam al-Hussein decides to leave Makkah and move towards Iraq, traveling side by side with him is Zuhair ibn al-Qayn. Now Zuhair, interestingly, did not join the Imam's caravan. He didn't join the Imam's caravan. Some of the reports state he went ahead, some of the reports say he stayed back, some of the reports say he traveled side by side, but he did not join the caravan of Imam Hussein. He still carried that wound. What's interesting about Zuhair ibn al-Qayn is that Zuhair knew the virtues of Imam al-Hussein. He knew that Imam Hussein was a righteous man. It's not that he didn't know. So this is an example. This here, if we look at this, if we look at and examine his internal process, because we talk about this is all about process. Examining process, looking at our own process, looking how our process works internally, looking how our process works outside. Before I continue, I also want to recognize that, look, we're talking about adl and qist and looking at it from the internal perspective and recognizing that it is a process. I also do want to acknowledge that that internal process does not happen in a vacuum. We also do have to recognize that we have to apply adala and qist on the outside. It would be great if we could sit for 5-10 years, however long it takes us, to work on our adala and qist inside, and the world waits for us. No, the reality is that these are parallel processes that are running. And going back to another premise, though we have to partake in implementing the adala and the qist internally and externally, we also have to be kind to ourselves in the sense that we're also not going to get it right, especially when it comes to the outside. Especially when it comes to the outside. We're not always going to get it right. But as long as we're aware that we are processing it and we are going through a process and we are refining that process, both internally and externally. Please recite a salawat. So now looking at Zuhair ibn al-Qayn and looking at this just one particular example, the conflict is that he has this hurt inside of him, but he also knows the virtues of Hussein ibn Ali. He knows this is a righteous man. It's not that he doesn't know, but he does not choose to join him. This, to me, when I look at it and analyze it, is an example where his adl is active inside of him, because he is aware internally that Hussein ibn Ali is a righteous man. Hussein ibn Ali is a virtuous man. Hussein ibn Ali is so on and so forth. So he has recognized that his adl is active, his adala is working inside of him. But what is inhibited? His qist. To make that decision, to make that intention to at least have a conversation with Hussein ibn Ali. So as a result, he avoids, which in our psychology and psychotherapy we call avoidance. But look at Hussein ibn Ali, look at Imam al-Hussein. Imam al-Hussein knows this about Zuhair. What does he do? He goes to Zuhair. He doesn't confront Zuhair. Let's also be clear, he doesn't confront Zuhair. He invites, he puts out an invitation to meet with Zuhair. At that point, Zuhair, because Zuhair is adil, Zuhair ibn al-Qayn knows Imam Hussein is a good man. He no longer can rely on avoidance. That avoidance now is finished. He has an obligation now to meet Hussein ibn Ali because he knows Hussein ibn Ali, and so he meets with him. So this is an example of a companion, and this is an example of a companion who wasn't a companion, who was actually an enemy. Well, I wouldn't even say enemy, we say adversary, right? Whose adl, or his adala internally, was active, it was working, but his qist was inhibited. Please recite a salawat. A meeting took place between Zuhair ibn al-Qayn and Imam al-Hussein, and history is very silent about what happened in that meeting. History is completely silent what happened in that meeting. Nobody knows what happened in that meeting. But once that meeting was done, Zuhair ibn al-Qayn resolved that he would join Imam Hussein. Not only join Imam Hussein, he went on to become the most ardent supporters and companions of Imam al-Hussein. As we talk about Zuhair ibn al-Qayn, we see the journey from Makkah to Karbala was long, but not all who arrived had begun with Imam al-Hussein. Among the travelers camped nearby was Zuhair ibn al-Qayn, a man once aligned with the Uthmani cause. He had actively avoided Hussein on the road, changing routes, timing meals, anything. This man was avoidant. But destiny does not delay. One afternoon, a messenger came to Zuhair's camp. "The son of Fatima requests to see you." He froze. He had never imagined that the grandson of the Prophet will call for him. His companions looked at him in confusion. His wife, seeing his hesitation, whispered to him, "Will you not answer the call of the grandson of the Prophet?" Zuhair stood. Quietly, he made his way to the tent. No one knows what was said inside, as we said. The walls do not speak this. The sand did not betray them. But when Hussein emerged, his eyes were wet and his heart had turned inside out. "By God, I will stand with Hussein," he declared, "even if I am killed." Please recite a salawat. "By God, I will stand with Hussein, even if I am killed." Sorry, please recite a salawat. Right, well, that's not working. So he declares that I will stand with Hussein even if I am killed. His companions are confused. Why? He doesn't say anything. On the day of Ashura, he comes to Imam al-Hussein and he asks for permission. The Imam initially is hesitant to let him go. Some reports, the sources differ on how he was martyred. Some sources say that he went to the battlefield, fought the battle, and won. And some sources say that when the time of Salat came and the Imam and the companions wanted to pray, that he stood guard while the Imam and his companions prayed. Whatever the case, Zuhair was an ardent companion of Imam Hussein, ready to give his life, who went through his own process, who went through his own very human process, and arrived and is recorded in the history, in the pages of history, as a hero on the plains of Karbala. Ala la'natullahi ala al-qawmi al-dhalimin, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un.
We'll now have Sister Nazneen do Noha and Ziyarat.